Hi, welcome everybody. As you can see, I'm in a faraway, undisclosed location. Um, I wanted to have a cool, environment to present this information to you guys. As he mentioned, I do presentations for Nassim Haramein, and I talked to him recently and told him I was doing this segment as part of this conference, specifically on crop circles. And he was the first guy that I came across that said stuff about crop circles that was outside what I was hearing from the mainstream. If you talk to the mainstream, they're going to say that crop circles are a hoax and that they're all made by people. When I say mainstream, I'm talking, CNN and BBC and things like this, the bigger news organizations. And I saw Nassim Haramein speak in 2002, and he proceeded to go through a bunch of physics and science and geometry and things that I totally followed, made sense, logical sense in terms of the science. And then he took a left turn, as I usually describe, meaning that all of a sudden he put up a picture of a crop circle. And it was very confusing to me at the time because I had read a lot of books about physics for the layman. Because, first of all, my background, as you heard from my bio that he just read, that bio is mainly about music because that's mainly what I do. I'm a musician. I went to a festival. Somebody who's a friend of mine used to be partners with Nassim, actually, and said, oh, yeah, I broke up with my old boyfriend and I have a new boyfriend. His name is Nassim Haramein, and he's speaking at this festival on unified field theory. And I said, oh, great. I'm interested in unified field theory because I've been asking the big questions that we've all been asking, right? How did I get here? How did the universe start? What are we supposed to do now? And how did life form? Is there a God? What is consciousness, right? All these questions. And so I started reading books related to everything from spirituality to physics. I came across the book Tao of Physics, right, which is Fritjof Capra's book in the 70s, who compares the work of Lao Tzu and ancient Chinese mysticism to modern physics at the time, including things like string theory. And so I read Dancing Woolly Masters. I read, Elegant Universe by Stephen Hawking, and Brian Greene's Elegant Universe by Brian Greene, and Brief History of Time by Stephen Hawking, and all these books for the layman about physics. Then I see Nassim speak, and he says stuff that's related, and then he talks about crop circles. And as you'll see, Brian Greene and Stephen Hawking are not talking about crop circles. Almost any physicist you talk to is not talking about crop circles. And yet Nassim put a crop circle picture up there. And I was confused. I thought, wait a minute, aren't these all hoaxes? I thought those two guys made them. Remember Doug and Dave? That's the story, right? The BBC once put these two guys on the screen, Doug and Dave, who said, yeah, we admit it. We're the guys. We're the crop circle guys. We go around making the crop circles. And so it was a hoax, right? We got caught. And so I kind of had that in my mind at the time in 2002. The crop circles, no one really knows. The word is not out yet. It still remains to be seen how these things form and all this stuff. And so I was a little skeptical, to say the least, when Nassim started talking about crop circles, encoding information and all this stuff. And so when I told Nassim that I was going to do this crop circle talk, he said, you're going to tell him what the crop circles are saying, right? And I said, yeah, I'm going to tell them that it's telling you about information, data and information that's geometric in nature, obviously. And so what geometry are they showing us? Is it random stuff? Is it just pretty pictures? You don't really see crop circles that are pictures of, scenes like kids running down the road with a balloon and a dog, or a house or something, normal. It's all these patterns and these very specific relationships geometrically. And that's where I first got in touch with this information. So before I launch actually into just talking about the crop circles themselves, I want to give you the 5 or 10 minute super condensed unified field theory download, as if I was, presenting this information from scratch to somebody who was really just had 5 minutes, which is to say that Nassim Haramein is a physicist. He studies the universe in the broadest possible way, right? And you know about that movie Theory of Everything that was written about Stephen Hawking. Stephen Hawking and Nassim Haramein are both basically trying to do the same thing. They're trying to come up with one set of information, one set of math, because that's the language that physicists use to write their ideas, right? They're trying to come up with mathematical equations that will describe everything in the entire universe, no matter what. We're talking infinitely large to infinitely small. And right now in physics, we have two sets of math. We have big math, thank you, Einstein, and we have quantum field theory, thank you, Max Planck, and a bunch of other folks who went down that road. Because if you try to apply the math of the big, Einstein's math, to subatomic particles, and you think, oh yeah, maybe an atom's like a little solar system, and the nucleus is like a star, and the electrons are like planets going around, it doesn't work like that at all. That does not apply. You can't just stick the math that perfectly predicts cosmological sized objects and what they do and apply that to the quantum scale. So we have a dichotomy in math and in physics. There's math for quantum, and there's math for cosmological. And Nassim Haramein and other unified field theorists are trying to come up with a unified field theory, a unified view of physics where everything is connected, and you include all the forces, and you include the occurrence of matter, and you even, in Nassim's case, include things like consciousness, which traditionally physics doesn't even touch. And so Nassim came to a conclusion over a long period of time, and the details of this are very ornate, let's just say, that there is one thing that actually connects all things. And if you could understand that one thing that is at the cosmological scale and at the quantum scale, then you'd be able to understand the entire structure of the entire universe. And what is that one thing that connects all things? Some people would call it God or light or love or something like this. But really, if you look at the mechanics of the physical reality that we're talking about, it's this thing that we commonly call space, right? Space is everywhere, no matter where you go. Even at the quantum scale, there's space. As a matter of fact, the atoms that make up our bodies, right? Trillions and trillions of them, or quintillions of them, probably more likely, they're made of 99.99999% space. There's only 0.0000001% stuff. And so that is weird in itself, right? Everything that we consider to be physical, all these objects that are around us and houses and our own bodies, are made of these little bits, these little highly energetic waveforms that are oscillating in the vacuum of space, the structure of space known as the vacuum. And these little oscillations that are mostly a vortex of space-time with not very much stuff, you know, even if you could call it stuff, right? Protons and neutrons and electrons. It's a very small percentage of the space. That reality we just see as solid is actually made vastly of this thing that we call space. So if you want to come up with a unified field theory that describes the entire universe from the infinitely large to the infinitely small, you might want to pay attention to the 99.99999% part. So the idea is to describe space as well as you possibly can in all possible ways of observing it. So is there structure to space, or is it just totally random? I remember being told as a kid that the universe is total chaos. There's particles flying all over the place, willy-nilly, everything's interacting. And over a really long period of time, we're so lucky, aren't we, that life happened to spontaneously form on this planet? Do you remember this whole story? That water is rare and all this stuff, and you know, we're lucky to be alive. We're a blob of plasma that evolved from a primordial soup that got energized by a lightning bolt, and lucky for us, DNA and RNA formed somehow, even though it's like the most complex, perfect storage mechanism ever in the entire universe. Boy, we're lucky that came together randomly. And then over a long period of time, evolution happened, and here we are having a teleconference over technology that we've developed. Doesn't seem very random to me. I mean, you could give a blind person a Rubik's Cube and say, move your hands once per second. There's quintillions of iterations of that. It would take you about 70 billion years moving your hands once per second to hit every iteration, so that no matter what, you definitely have worked that out. So the whole idea that the universe is random is ridiculous when you look at how much complexity that we're exhibiting right now. And all that complexity, all the matter, all the stars, all the gases, all the asteroids, us, is all made of atoms. We haven't found any matter not made of atoms, and it's mostly made of space. And so is there structure, or is it random? Is there a density to it? Is there energy in there? As it turns out, empty space isn't empty at all, right? It's completely filled with energy. We've been knowing this for a long time. Einstein, David Bohm, all these guys, Planck, knew that the vacuum or space, or what they used to call the ether, remember that? They took that away. They didn't like the idea of the ether. It was too magical, right? It was the plenum. It was the source field. It was the quantum foam in quantum field theory, right? David Wilcock calls it the source field. In Polynesian culture, it's called mana. In Asian cultures, it's called chi. You can call it whatever you want. God, space, the vacuum. It's all the same stuff. It's what we're made of. We are made of and bathing in basically an infinitely dense superfluid medium that we call space. Now, notice I said it's nearly infinitely dense. That's very hard to imagine. Wait a minute. Say I'm floating in the vacuum of space, right? There's no atmosphere. I'm moving my hand. How can I feel anything? I don't feel anything. There's no density to that. How can there be a density? If there's a density, then why am I not feeling this density? So Nassim Harameyn's hypothesis in a nutshell is maybe the reason space is infinitely full, but we don't perceive that, we think it's empty, is because the structure of the space is in absolute perfect balance, in a perfect equilibrium, if you will, right? And what's the study of structure in space called? It's called geometry. So if you want to understand the structure of the vacuum that would account for the fact that it's full, even though we perceive it as empty, you need to study the geometry of the fabric of the vacuum. And so we need to find a perfectly balanced geometry that can be scalar and go as a fractal to infinitely large and infinitely small, so that it's wherever space is, right? And so to do that, you have to try to find the most balanced, perfect geometry where every vector perfectly balances out. So Nassim around that time was trying to figure out what is the geometry of space-time. And he had to look for that geometry. And then when he discovered what that geometry was, and I'll explain it to you here in a second, he saw that it was perfectly matching geometries showing up in crop circles. And it wasn't just showing up in the last few years. There's been reports of crop circles going way back into the 1800s. This is one of the earliest pictures depicting what they think was a crop circle. And they thought at the time that it had to be a devil that went into the fields with a scythe there and was cutting the grass or something like that. And so this is one of the early renditions of a crop circle. But to get to how we got to these crop circles in the first place and why I'm talking about this in relation to unified field theory, you have to go back to Nassim's personal experience going to Mexico and seeing structures like Chichen Itza, and here's Teotihuacan, these very structured pyramidal architecture that's laid out in a specific way and relationships. And at the end of the career of an archaeologist, Peter Tompkins, who was studying this city, he concluded that what the Mayans and the Mexicans were trying to tell us with their pyramids is that there's a relationship between a sphere and a tetrahedron. The tetrahedron, of course, is the simplest of the 5 Platonic solids. And if you put a tetrahedron inside of really the most basic, most fundamental structure that the universe makes, the universe is making spheres at all scales. Galaxies are essentially spherical with a accretion disk, and the stars go up into the halo and back down and then out, and making a toroidal structure. A dual torus is basically a sphere. And so we're talking atoms, we're talking the energy around our bodies being spherical, the earth being a sphere. No, it's not flat. Thank you very much, flat earth. Galaxies being a sphere, the universe being a sphere. It's embedded, spheres inside of spheres inside of spheres, fractally to infinity. So it's pretty interesting that they were telling us this relationship in their pyramids, because if you put a tetrahedron in a sphere, it intersects the sphere at 19.47 degrees latitude, and you see that encoded in not just the pyramids, but in structures on our sphere. If you put a tetrahedron inside the Earth, the largest mountain on the planet is the big island of Hawaii, and that city, Teotihuacan, is actually on 19.47 degrees latitude, telling you that not only were the Mexicans and the Mayans and the Aztecs aware when they were building their pyramids of the relationship of the sphere and the tetrahedron, they knew where they were on the Earth. And so they probably did know that they were, on a sphere. So no, Christopher Columbus didn't discover America and discover that the Earth was round and all this stuff. I literally was told that when I was a kid. It's part of why I do these lectures, right? I want to undo some of the incorrect education that I received and my colleagues and my classmates, right? And so Nassim is looking at the tetrahedrons and says, okay, tetrahedrons are probably having something to do with the structure of the vacuum, because it's the most foundational, most well constructed and solid geometry that there is. With 6 lines, you can make a 3-dimensional geometry called a tetrahedron, a 4-sided object. Each has an equilateral triangle on it. And so if you put a bunch of these together, you could make a larger tetrahedron out of 20 smaller tetrahedrons. It's what Buckminster Fuller discovered and described as the isotropic vector matrix. And if you take 2 isotropic vector matrices that are 20 tetrahedrons each, one pointing up and one pointing down, you get this, you get the star tetrahedron. Okay, you've all heard of the Merkaba or the star tetrahedron. Well, inside of a star tetrahedron, made of 40 total tetrahedrons, you get this geometry in red, which is a cube octahedron, and this geometry is in a perfect vector equilibrium. It's a perfectly balanced geometry. This is the kind of geometry you would need to find if you were to describe a scalar fractal geometry that gets larger and larger. And so Nassim looks at this, he says, let's put more tetrahedrons onto the outside of this to see if we can get to the next octave. And at a total of 64 tetrahedrons, you get a cube octahedron inside of a cube octahedron. 2 octaves of perfectly balanced geometry. The kind of geometry that would account for the fact that space is full, even though we perceive it as empty, because no matter where a force comes from, there's an equal and opposite vector in that geometry that's at the same length as the other one. And all those vectors from the center to the edge and the edges are all the same length. It's like putting 8 star tetrahedrons together. And so this geometry, the 64 tetrahedron grid, is foundational to Nassim Haramein's unified field theory, because it's the fewest number of tetrahedra that you need to put together to get the first octave of what is an infinite fractal series of perfectly balanced geometry, creating this thing that we call space that's sitting there in perfect balance. It's like being in a swimming pool with water molecules everywhere. And no matter what scale you're at, you can get this spinning vortex to form like a whirlpool in the bathtub that we're in. We're in a giant bathtub, basically. It's made of space-time, and space-time is quantized. It's not just a continuous thing. You can think of space-time like Einstein's equations talking about space-time curving and like this, and you think of it as a smooth surface. Just like when you pull the water out of your drain and the water goes down, it's not just going straight down, it's actually curling as it goes down. And so Nassim added the math to make Einstein's curvature of space-time be the curling of space-time, including the fact that everything is spinning, right? Atoms, planets, galaxies, the universe itself, all spinning. There's nothing that's not spinning. The energy field around you is spinning. You're made of 100 trillion cells. Each one of those made of trillions of atoms, and they're all spinning at the speed of light right now. They will not slow down ever. Protons have been spinning since the Big Bang and never slowed down. So when people talk about free energy not being possible, maybe they should look at what they're made of, right? Like, you don't have to put any gas into atoms to keep them spinning. How is that happening? That's a good question. If you could figure that out, you've got unlimited energy. And so understanding the geometry of the space and understanding how vortexes called atoms, hurricanes, black holes on all scales, right? All these vortexes in space-time. If you could understand how that works, then maybe you could understand everything, like how to make energy that doesn't require blowing stuff up that you dug into the ground to get out of the middle of the earth. We know that's not a good idea, right? Particulate in the atmosphere, we got to stop. And so space-time, like water, is quantized. Water is not continuous. It's made of quantized little bits that we call water molecules. And the molecules are quantized into things we call atoms, and the atoms are quantized into things that we call protons, neutrons, and electrons. And a proton is a fundamental particle. Those things do not change. They exist for billions of years. The fact that they now bash protons together to try to get them to break apart, and this tiny subatomic particle exists for a nanosecond, they take a picture of it and they go, aha, another fundamental particle. No, a fundamental particle doesn't just go back into the vacuum in a nanosecond. It hangs out. You just broke apart a structure that's fundamental into like a weird chunk, and then you say, oh, that chunk looks like that. We're going to call it a particle. And then another chunk comes off like this, and you call it another particle. In other words, particle physics is in big trouble. Just look up the proton problem. Google the proton problem. Protons they thought were a certain size. It turns out it's 4% off. Then Nassim comes and through geometry and measuring cosmological sized black holes and the data that we've gotten from it, extrapolates a ratio of geometry. Okay, are you guys following this? A ratio of geometry, not tensor equations and Einstein super complicated math and all this stuff. A geometry that's so simple you can explain it to a kid, scale it down to the size of a proton and say, well, according to this ratio, the proton should be exactly this big. And guess what? He predicted a much more accurate measurement of the proton, a muonic measurement of the proton using a much larger atomic structure, so it's more accurate measurement. He predicted something that is so incredibly small within one standard deviation of the experiment, within the margin of error of the experiment. So this means that Nassim's unified field theory has made a very powerful prediction about the fundamental structure that makes up everything else, the proton. And he did that through geometry, looking at scalar fractal geometry, realizing that inside of a proton there are little bits, and those bits were discovered by Max Planck. And Max Planck named them after himself. They're called Planck units, or the Planck length, which you may have heard is the shortest possible wavelength of the electromagnetic spectrum. We cannot measure anything smaller than the Planck length. And using this, he's figured out how the proton is a conglomeration of these little Planck bits. And there's actually 10 to the 60 of them in there. That's so many that if each little Planck spherical unit inside of a proton was the size of a grain of sand, then your proton would be from here to Alpha Centauri. So that we're talking billions and billions and billions of times smaller than a proton is the fundamental little, think of it as like the pixel size of our universe. Now he's applying this geometry to everything, and you'll see that nature is following very specific patterns, and frequency and vibration of the electromagnetic spectrum is following very specific patterns. And so the understanding of unified field theory and the physics applies to everything having to do with shape and geometry and structure and waveforms. Like Nikola Tesla said, right? If you want to understand the universe, you have to think of frequency and vibration, right? And energy. So that's what we're doing. We're actually describing the structure of the space that is accounting for everything. It actually has a tetrahedral structure where 8 tetrahedrons pointing in gives you the vector equilibrium, what Buckminster Fuller called the cube octahedron. And then 8 tetrahedrons pointing out, the star tetrahedron, is giving you the geometry of expansion. So you have contraction and expansion at the same time in an infinite tetrahedral array. So there's more than 10 minutes, I guess, in unified field theory encapsulation, but it gives you a sense of why it was such a heavy thing when the next slide that Nassim put up, he said, and then some kids went out into the field and they stomped into the grass. What do we need to know? Like, okay, if crop circles are coming from somewhere in space, from some beings or something like this, who knows? Then what are you trying to tell us? I mean, what is all this stuff? And the crop circle that showed up right after they said that was not E equals MC squared. It was geometry. And then you're like, okay, what geometry was it? Oh, that looks familiar. That looks like a bunch of tetrahedrons with a fractal boundary around the edge, giving you a smaller version of the overall structure, showing you that this goes smaller and smaller to infinity, or bigger and bigger to infinity, right? Some kids made letters in the grass. What do we need to know? The next crop circle that showed up is this one. I think this is around in 1993 or something, right? So quite a while ago at this point. But this is, one of those crop circles where, some of them, sure, they're made by people, right? There was a company not very long ago, not far from where I am right now. I'm actually in Santa Cruz, California, USA, not far from here, near the shore, near a farm, a company that makes computer chips hired some people, I don't know who it was, to make a crop circle that was the circuit board of their chips. And when it first showed up, it actually hit the news. People were like, whoa, this is an epic crop circle, right? And I took a look at it and I was like, wow, that is a pretty good crop circle. It's hard to tell, was this made by people or was it made by this company? As it turned out, it was made by some computer company, right? So there's crop circles that are made by people, absolutely, right? There's the Pac-Man logo and like joke ones of people smoking and alien heads with funny things coming out. I mean, some of them made by people. Sure, I consider whoever makes those crop circles and you can't find them and no one saw them in there and they sneak in and make it really good and then go away and they got away with it. It's part art, it's part science, it's part magic, it's part, you know, being a stalker and being stealth in the night and all this stuff. Good on you. You know, I have mad respect. I consider crop circle makers to be brilliant artists, sure. And then there's crop circles like this. Notice the shading in there. Like there's sections that are darker and lighter. I always say to my audience, if I'm doing a lecture, you know, let's divide everybody up, and, you know, we're going to go out tonight in the dark and you can't wear any headlamps. We're going to need to make a crop circle. And I want this half of the room to work on the part that's dark. And then you guys work on the part that's light, because my friend's going to fly over this thing tomorrow in an airplane and take a picture of it. And I want to make sure that the light from the sun bounces off the crops differently over here than it does over here. Can you guys make sure you got that? Okay, right? You guys maybe take your boards and ropes, right? Of course, this is the classic explanation by the skeptics, right? That the crop circles are made by kids or jokers or college students or whatever that have boards with holes drilled in each side, and then a rope goes through it with some knots so that you can hold onto this rope almost like you're on a horse or something, and you put your feet on the board, and then you're shuffling your feet back and forth and walking around in the crops to make these you know, structures that show up usually overnight, not always overnight, but usually in the dark, and usually in the summer, but not always, and quite often in England, in the southern part of England, although there have been crop circles that have showed up everywhere around the world, from Brazil to the United States, all over Europe, Ukraine, et cetera, et cetera. For some reason, there are more crop circles in southern England. The theory of why that is varies greatly. I have my own thoughts on it. I'll maybe save that for a minute. So I just want to say straight up in the beginning here, I personally think the jury is still out on the crop circles. I am not sure. I don't know if anybody's absolutely sure. There's definitely people that have their opinion, ranging from every single one is made by people to almost all of them are not made by people, you know. I think, you know, if you have a Pac-Man logo, even the people that are into the crop circles will say, okay, maybe whoever was making these and putting the geometry of space-time down didn't put a Pac-Man logo, but this is very specific geometry. In other words, you could put the 64 tetrahedron grid over this, and you will see that there's a specific patterning to it that matches the geometry that Nassim Haramein is describing in his unified field theory. And the next crop circle that showed up after this one happened to be very much related. You can see July 23rd, 1997. It's near this mound near Avery. You can see a road in the background there. It gives you a sense of scale of how big this is. So it's not trivial at all to make one of these. If you were to try to do it with boards and ropes, it takes quite a lot of time, and obviously you would have a very difficult time making that shading. You can even see it in this photo, how the crops have been laid down differently in different sections. And obviously, you know, things like the fact that it's absolutely symmetrical. It's not that one of these is a little off. They're all perfectly the same size and all this stuff. The next crop circle that showed up, I'm not sure how much later it was, but relatively soon after that one, a new crop circle showed up that had the same structure on the outside, and then it showed a geometry that might be radiating in, showing a fractal division going smaller and smaller and a fractal division going larger and larger. So this could be, you know, what do we need to know? You need to know the geometry of space-time, because if you do, you'll understand that it actually goes all the way down to the quantum level, and it goes up beyond the universal level. Like, we don't know what's outside our universe. It's very likely, according to Nassim's theory anyway, that the universe is part of a fractal series, and our universe is likely very, very, very small. It's a tiny little dot inside of a much larger structure. I wouldn't be surprised if our universe is the size of a proton in a much larger universe. And so it's obviously difficult to even conceive of this, because, you know, thinking about infinity is the trick, right? You can't perceive infinity because it's infinite. And we tend to think in finite terms. We tend to think not only in finite terms, but in terms of our local area and our local scale. So this was very opening to me. I went from being very skeptical to thinking, okay, I got to look into this more. And the more, of course, I looked into Nassim's work, and the more I looked into crop circles, and the more I looked into the work of many of the other presenters in this conference, the more interested I was. And so I've been going around for many years talking about unified field theory, the big picture of the physics. And when you talk about everything in the universe, inside of everything in the universe is crop circles and quantum field theory and ancient civilizations and disclosure and extraterrestrials, and it leads to all sorts of things. So it's been fascinating for me to try to fit all these various dots and parts of the universe together into a unified way of describing a theory that in itself is unifying everything in the physics of the universe. Here's a 64 tetrahedron grid structure overlaid over this crop circle. It could be a coincidence, right? Anything could be a coincidence. But if there's a bunch of coincidences in a row and they all point in the same direction, the chances of that all being a coincidence go down and down and down. And that's what happens with unified field theory. You start looking at the geometry of space-time and applying it to everything, and you'll see that it's encoded everywhere you look. I don't want to have time to go into all that stuff, but certainly crop circles is one of the places that this is encoded. You can take 6 tree of life structures. This is an ancient pre-Christian Kabbalistic tradition, and place this over this. It's 6 around 1 forms the 7th. Then you get to the octave and the pattern repeats at 8. Just like in music, right? You have a note, you go up 7 notes and your 8th note is the octave of where you started. This is an analogous patterning happening in the structure of space-time being encoded by crop circles. So you'll see, just by walking into a crop circle, you're going to leave a trail in the crops. So the idea that folks can just walk along the tram lines of the plows that go through the fields and hide their footprints and then jump out in there and make a whole crop circle and then go back along the tram lines and not leave a single footprint is very doubtful. I mean, sometimes these things show up in a field right after it rained and it's quite muddy, and you would definitely leave some sort of trace of walking around in the mud, not to mention the fact that these crops are not just simply lying down. They might be in some cases, but a lot of times it's growing and then the stalk bends, like it almost grew faster on one side of the stalk to make it go like this, and a node forms, and then the crops are woven together. It's not just lying. They're woven together, they're spiraled together, they're sometimes sticking up. And so this is not achievable just by a mashing kind of technique with your board and your rope. It would have to be something that is much more subtle, much more advanced. So even if these are made by people, I just want to say this crop circle that perfectly matches the 64 tetrahedron grid was made by people, it could be an amazing thing to realize that there's some sort of crazy technology that exists that we don't know about that can do this. Because if it was made by people with some microwave technology or there's an app that they've developed where they could just draw it and press a button and it goes, makes it, and that's amazing too. And maybe, there's secret technologies that have been developed that, the military or somebody is using to make these. I don't know. That would be a great story too. I just want to know. I think everybody wants to know. And the jury is still out as far as I can tell. I mean, there's a lot of evidence here pointing to the fact that these are not made by people. And I'm going to get into more of this evidence. I just want to start moving through the structures because they started out a long time ago, fairly simple. Some of them are just literally a circle. And then you get the star tetrahedrons. Then you get the fractal division of space-time going in and out. Then you get something like this, a cube octahedron. This is the geometry of perfect balance, where there's 12 radial vectors going out, and it forms vectors on the outside that are the same length as the ones going in. And so the cube octahedron with a sphere around it could be what they're trying to tell us here, boundary condition around a sphere. And so it's very specific geometries they're trying to convey to us. It's the geometries of the structure of the vacuum. It's the geometry of our existence. Everything in the universe is made up of fundamental geometries that are encoded into things like atoms. There's very specific geometries that correspond with different atomic structures. You can check out the work of Robert Moon, who is at Chicago University. He worked on developing the ideas of geometry and the Platonic solids related to atomic structures. And here we are seeing these very same geometries being encoded in crops around the world. Maybe we should start paying attention to what these geometries are trying to tell us. Now it looks like you've got a cube octahedron or a tetrahedral geometry that has spheres around it that are rotating. And so maybe we should learn from that. Notice the placement of this, right? If you learn how to spin some geometries, maybe you could get some power out of it, right? It's right next to these power lines. There could be all kinds of signals and signs being sent to us. They're trying to teach us, whoever they are, right? Maybe it's the Earth who's conscious in itself, and the Earth is talking to us by doing this from below, just sending, patterns of energy, and maybe the gravitational field of the Earth is warping in this location locally to help, manipulate the crops. It's unsure. Studies have been done on crop circles in great detail, and we've seen in certain cases that there are electromagnetic disturbances. In other words, you try to walk in there with your camera to take a picture of the crop circle, and then your camera batteries die. And so it's not the easiest thing to even gather the data sometimes, because some of the high-tech equipment will stop working as soon as you get in there. Notice the half moons and shapes and how perfect they are, and how the relationship between them, and how they're all identical. You can see somebody standing in there on the left side to give you a sense of scale. I really doubt that humans that are like, finish your beers, everybody, and get, put on your backpacks, we're going to go out into the field with our boards, and don't put on your headlamps. We don't want anybody to see us. And in the pitch dark, in the short evening in England, because in the summer, darkness is 6 hours long or something. So it's not like you can go out there and work on this for days. You have to do it in a few hours if you're a human trying to hoax this. So this one I like, because it really shows the precision and also the spin. Now we're moving right into one of the most famous and most interesting crop circles that there is. This crop circle, as you can see, is across the street, literally from Stonehenge. This one actually has shown up in things like Daniel Pinchbeck's book, 2012, The Return of Quetzalcoatl. This image is on the cover of that book. And Daniel mentions some crop circles and goes into some of them in detail in that book. Pretty cool reference to check out. Of course, then you're also learning about ancient Mayan history and prophecies and things like this. But Stonehenge, obviously, is a controversial and interesting in its own sense. The debate has been raging on the purpose of Stonehenge and the size of it. I heard that they just found another Stonehenge-like circle, and they may have found the place where the stones came from, and they're much larger and much older, and they actually covered up some of Stonehenge by accident with the parking lot, because they didn't have the satellite imagery possible, like the woman who won the TED Prize. With satellite imagery finding hidden pyramids in Egypt, they can now see with satellite technology hidden locations around Stonehenge. But this crop circle is famous and interesting for a special reason, which is that this crop circle showed up in about 45 minutes in the middle of broad daylight, and no one saw anybody out there. It's not like the kids in that car driving down the street were like, okay, boys, finish up your beer. We're going to run out there and make a perfect Julia set fractal, 96 circles. Don't leave any footprints. Don't let anybody see you run out there. It's just not happening. Somebody flew over this field, went and visited Stonehenge, and then when they flew back over it 45 minutes later, they saw that this had appeared since they had gone by. So they took some pictures. And this is one of my favorite crop circles, really, for that reason, because it did show up in the middle of the day, and it is right across from Stonehenge. And so it seems very unlikely that it would be random, that it happened to show up next to Stonehenge, and that it would be, perfectly formed like this in a short amount of time in broad daylight. So it just adds to the thought that some of these things can't just be kids with boards and ropes. And so then the question, of course, becomes, how do these get formed, and why do they get formed, and who's making them? And it's really one of the biggest mysteries out there, in the top 10, certainly on the planet, as far as I can tell. And there's been more coverage of it recently, thanks to things like Ancient Aliens. When I first started talking about crop circles, that show didn't exist. And so if you started talking about extraterrestrials in a casual way in public, some people will look at you really strange. Some people will get really upset, if they are let's say, a fundamentalist of any religion on the planet. They have their fundamental views of how things work. They might have a tradition or even a book that says this is the deal, and this is how everything came to be, and this is what God is, or who God is. And if you're not down with that description, then I'm not so down with your description of where these things come from and extraterrestrials and stuff like this. And now I find, and I think we're all seeing this, right, that things like crop circles, things like disclosure, things like the possible existence of extraterrestrials is becoming more okay to discuss. And more people are seeking the data and seeking the information that they can use to try to decipher and, figure out where and how these things come together. So it's a really interesting time to be around, to be studying this stuff. Since the internet came around, we can now do things like we're doing right now and share information widely. People that have been trying to hide things for a long time are having a really difficult time continuing to hide them. People that have been trying to do things in secret are having a hard time doing it. And so it's just a matter of time before we have enough cameras on enough hills that we get more footage of stuff. Now, there's a video out there that you may see somewhere online showing a crop circle forming in real time with a little orb of light flying at high speed over the field. And there's been a ton of debate about that one specific video. I've seen documentaries on it. Some people say it's an absolute fake. Some other people say that it's not a fake, and they interviewed the guy who filmed it. It's a tough call. It's hard to tell. CGI is very advanced. You could manipulate a video very easily. At this point, everybody can do it on their computer at home. So I can't wait personally for myself to get into a crop circle, because although I'm doing a lecture on crop circles, I have not been personally in one myself. I hope to do that at some point, and I look forward to that. I have talked to many people, though, who have been in crop circles and have told me, their personal stories. And it seems like crop circles have this interesting aspect where people are affected differently by their personality type. Before I go to the next slide and continue with this thread, I just wanted to point out this one. I love this one because it looks so 3D, like those circles are popping up out of the crops. I mean, obviously it is 3D. It's not flat because it's made of crops, but this one has a nice illusion to it. And this one too, it gives you a sense of this vortex and the spinning cycle in and out like a dual torus, which is the fundamental structure that we find everywhere in the universe. But I remember specifically Daniel Pinchbeck was telling me once that when he went to a crop circle with somebody that was paranoid and skeptical, within minutes of them going into the crop circle, a black, unmarked helicopter started flying overhead. And so the paranoid person was extra paranoid. And then another time, on a different occasion, Daniel went into a crop circle with somebody who is very, let's just say, attuned and spiritual and sensitive. And when they went in, they started to see these orbs of light. And the woman described how, yes, I know these orbs of light. I have a relationship with them, and there's a couple that live in my bathroom in New York City. So I think it's interesting how there's a psychological effect. Some people walk into a crop circle and they just want to start laughing, or they want to start crying, or they just want to sit down and meditate, or they literally lie down and go to sleep, or they get dizzy and nauseous and they have to leave. It depends on the person. So there's a lot more going on than what we see on the surface. I think that's an important thing to remember in general, considering that the electromagnetic spectrum is going through all these frequencies that we do not perceive directly. You have your eyes and your ears, and you can see certain frequencies of the electromagnetic spectrum. You can hear from 20 hertz to 20,000 hertz. And that together, all combined, is about 1/10 billionth of the amount of information riding on the electromagnetic spectrum right now. In other words, right now, I have wireless technology running, right? So those signals are going through me. My cell phone sitting here. I've got cell phone signals going through me. There's radio stations in the area broadcasting right now. There's television and satellite projecting GPS signals through me right now. I don't feel any of that stuff, right? That doesn't mean it's not there. So there could be all kinds of energy that can organize themselves into structures like balls of light that could move about and manipulate the electromagnetic spectrum in all kinds of ways. If I showed up with my iPhone hundreds of years ago and I somehow had another friend with an iPhone and there was a satellite working, I could talk to them on FaceTime and they would think, this is magic, this is impossible, you're a witch, I'm going to burn you at the stake and all this kind of stuff. And there's an explanation for it. It's just because we didn't understand the physics yet. So it seems like magic. Anything that's magic or metaphysical or paranormal, like crop circles, is basically just, magic to most people until it can be described in terms of the physics. And there's various levels of sensitivity to these kinds of energies, and people react to them in different ways when you go into them. So I'm curious to see what it'll be like for me if I walk into something like that. That is an incredible one. Notice the shading, again, around the outside. Highly organized, super ornate, super accurate, shading effect, large scale. It just seems like it would be difficult to make these patterns in this way by traditional mechanical means. This one, you can see there's like a dual torus vortex spinning and these glyphs around the outside. You can see that there's snow in the background there in the hills. Most of the crop circles are showing up in the summer months. Some of them show up in the spring, some of them in the fall. This must have been in one of those seasons because there's still little snow in the background there. This one I like too because it's got this braided shading effect. There's texture to the crops. This seems to be a more recent phenomenon. I think if you look at the crop circles in the 90s, this wasn't showing up as much. There could be new techniques that are being developed by people that are doing these, or it could be that there's increasing levels of complexity because as our consciousness expands, as we become more aware of ourselves and the universe, then maybe we have a larger capacity to be able to understand and absorb these geometries and this information. At least that's one hypothesis, that with this evolution of consciousness is a corresponding evolution of technology. We've been seeing that through the course of human evolution from the Dark Ages to inventing music and dance and theater and having the Renaissance. Things got a lot more fun, and it happened in a shorter period of time. Then we had the agricultural revolution. It was a shorter period of time. Then we had the technological revolution and the age of computers and the age of internet, which is our lifetime. And that's a shorter and shorter spiral of evolution of technology and consciousness, leading us to this point where the advancements are coming so quickly that we can barely even keep up and take note of how fast our technology and our understanding of the universe and our consciousness and our empathy and our society getting along, it's all happening. There's good news happening all the time. Unfortunately, the mainstream media tends to focus on the bad news. But I see through all these different channels, including my day-to-day life, not on any sort of media, all sorts of good things happening. And I think with that, we're getting an increase in this kind of communication. If this communication is coming from other worlds, if it's coming from intelligence off of our extra real information, extraterrestrials, then I think that they're happy to see that we're finally figuring some stuff out and that we're eventually going to learn how to get along with each other. In the end, I think that's the most important thing. And that's actually why I do these lectures on unified field theory and here on crop circles. It's not just to talk about something that's interesting. It's not just to entertain you, although I hope it's entertaining. I'm actually doing it because I feel like if we can all come to an understanding of how the universe works and the fundamental structures that are in the universe, then we'll learn how to operate and how to be in the universe in a way that it resonates with the universe, that it's not fighting against it. We're not blowing stuff up to make energy anymore. We're acting in accordance with nature. We're acting in harmony and collaborating with nature to make things better. Instead of saying, oh, thanks, nature, chop, chop, hack, hack, dig, dig, blow up, burn, all this stuff that we're doing. I have a feeling it's going to be the old dark ages that we're in. We're barely out of the dark ages. We're still burning stuff. As soon as we stop burning stuff, I think we're going to get along better. We're not going to have a shortage of resources. A shortage of resources and burning oil means the people that have more oil have more power and more money. And then you draw a border and you say, okay, you're that country over there and we're this country over here, and you have way more oil than these countries. So we're going to have to try to go take some of your oil so that we have some security for the long-term future. It's leading to bad things. And this information, if it's encoding the geometry of space-time, could be very important information for us to learn how to develop technologies that work in accordance with the geometry and the dynamics that we see in the structure of space-time. In other words, making quote-unquote free energy devices, which is not a great name for them, really. Considering all energy is free all the time, like the fact that all I have to do is eat, drink, and sleep, and my body does everything else, there's a lot of energy going on in my 5 quintillion atoms spinning at the speed of light in perfect coordination, so I can think about what I want to say and vibrate my vocal cords, and I vibrate the air between me and the microphone, and it transfers that into electrical impulses. They go through wires and then come out the other side and then vibrate the ear with the air on your end, and you can hear me and say, oh, cool, I know what you're talking about. That is a miracle. That is amazing. There is so much energy that's involved in doing that, and you don't have to fuel anything to have that happen. The Earth is spinning around the sun is spinning around the galaxy is spinning, every atom in the galaxy is spinning, and you never have to add energy to it. If we could just learn to extract 1/1,000,000th of 1% of the energy that exists fractally at all scales, like being expressed with this crop circle, with these radiating energy, waveforms coming off of it, then we could learn how to make technology that does involve combustion and blowing things up. Maybe we could develop a technology that learns how to, instead of blowing things up and having entropy, comes together towards the center, like gravity, and you have centropy, a centripetal force, a coming together. If you get something to spin really fast, and then it keeps spinning, and you don't have to put any more energy into it, and it'll just keep spinning and spinning and spinning, then you've got some really amazing technology going. And I think that's where we are starting to go, both in our awareness, right? Like meditation, that's where you point all your attention into the center of your existence. Thank you, Buddha, Jesus, Muhammad, every ascended master that ever lived on this planet was trying to tell us to do that, right? Like, go in, because it's all in there. And that's what holographic theory says. Nassim Haramein's holofractographic unified field theory is talking about how all the information of all the protons in the entire universe are encoded into every proton. That, like Rumi said, you're not a drop in the ocean, you're an entire ocean in the drop. Rumi was talking holofractographic unified field theory, except they didn't have science back then. They didn't have the scientific method. And now we have a way of describing things that have been encoded for a long time in things like ancient cultures, architecture, and ancient cultures, monuments and documents and traditions. Now it's showing up not only in the physics, but it's showing up in crop circles. And so we have a cross medium affirmation of a common set of information. That set of information is geometric information. Geometric information is at the foundation of everything, because everything exists in the structure of space. And space, by definition, is the structure of geometry. It is a definition of our reality, of how you describe our existence. All of our geometry is in resonance with the fundamental geometries of the universe. And that's why they call it sacred geometry, as somebody's commenting here. I'm seeing your comments go, by the way, you guys. And so I'm trying to weave in what you're saying. But if you have questions, I'll get to those at the end. I guess I have 2 hours. And Neil said I could go longer if I want. And so we'll see what happens. But I have a lot of crop circle shots I want to show you. But these geometries that we see in crop circles are very much related to the fundamental geometries that we see in the universe in unified field theory. So maybe there's a clue here as to who is sending them. Because if you understand the geometry of spacetime and the dynamics of spacetime, and you've made technologies that enable you to travel long distances, for example, maybe faster than the speed of light, then you have the ability to express this stuff and teach others and, you know, evolve your species and help other species to evolve. And so that's one theory, is that, you know, we are being watched, that we have been watched for a long time. We may have been seeded in the first place. In other words, the life didn't start from the primordial soup energized by a lightning bolt. It was literally beings, whoever they were, going, okay, this looks like a good planet. It's starting to form an atmosphere and there's liquid water on the surface now. Let's make this our new incubator. Okay, boop, put some microorganisms in there. Okay, let's just hang out for 4 billion years and then we'll come back and check on it. And so maybe that's what's going on. We've been around about 4 billion years on this planet, 4 point something. And here we are discussing our own existence and seeing crazy stuff like these crop circles showing up. And it's not just the crop circles, right? There's anomalies that have been shown up all over the world. There's gravitational anomalies, obviously the UFO phenomenon, which I'm sure a lot of the presenters have been talking about, has been around for a long time as well. I'm just sticking to the crop circle aspect. It's all connected, though. I mean, that's the bottom line of the whole thing. The whole bottom line of unified field theory is that everything is connected. And it's not just connected. It's like, let's describe how it's connected and why it's connected and the mechanics of that. Not just say, oh, we're all one, everything is one, which we've heard a million times in the spiritual tradition, but we haven't been able to come up with the specific mathematics for describing how we're all one, and that is what Nassim Haramein has done in his work. So I, encourage you, of course, to check that out. But meanwhile, a lot of the stuff that Nassim discovered about the structure of spacetime we see now encoded in the crop circles, geometric information that maybe is meant to just raise our vibration and raise our level of consciousness just by looking at it. So I'm hoping that I'm showing you some of the more resonant crop circles. I'm not showing all of them. There's so many different ones, but I chose ones that I thought were beautiful, interesting, and showed, for example, this one shows scale really well because there's so many people inside there. Notice how perfect it is, how it'd be really hard to coordinate doing this again without being caught. Some of these things are multiple football fields long. This is probably about 200 meters long. Not insignificant amount of work to put this down like this. It's really quite incredible. And I'm always kind of surprised that you don't see these more on the news. You don't really see crop circles showing up on BBC and CNN and things like this. Occasionally they'll put one up, but they don't want to get caught saying, look at this crazy phenomenon. No one knows where it came from. And it turns out it's a computer chip company that made this, one like the one near here. But I think it'll come out eventually how these are happening, and media will start covering it. Now that we have things like social media, of course, and independent small channels on YouTube and all this, there's alternative media that cover these things all the time. And so obviously, if you start searching the words crop circle on any search engine and you click image and video, you're going to be there for a long time. There's a lot of information out there. And the trick really is to have the discernment to try to figure out what is real and what is not real, and what is purposefully disinformation and what is distraction and what is resonant, correct information. And that is a trick. It takes practice to understand how to navigate the field, because we have a lot of trolls out there in the world and some very upset people, rightfully so, because there's a lot of injustice in the world. And so I have empathy for the trolls and the upset people, but it definitely makes our lives difficult. And when it comes to trying to figure out what is actually true and what online is real, when you see UFO footage, is this a fake or is this real? But the fact remains that these are a mystery that we don't really know. Some people have theories, but it's hard to really prove things at this point, as far as I can tell, in my experience of studying this, I've heard various researchers describing their thoughts on this. And some people will say that it's the kids. Some people will say it's the balls of light. Some people will say it's the earth, which is consciousness, has consciousness talking from below. Others will say that it's, extraterrestrial crafts of some kind, beings inside of ships that are using some sort of technology to do this. I mean, when you think about the fact that here today in 2016, our level of technology, we can already teleport quantum bits of information. We can already 3D print organs that grow into the perfect shape and can be implanted into humans. We can transplant things. We can genetically modify organisms. We can create new life forms. We could bring the woolly mammoth back. Imagine a civilization that started our level of technology and is 1,000,000 years advanced from us in their technology. Making some crop circles would be no problem. As a matter of fact, we might be able to have the technology to make these things using microwaves or other types of radiation right now, and we don't know about it commonly. And so that could be the interest. Just the fact that these exist just is fascinating. And there's a lot of people that go out and make a living of taking pictures of them. Lucy Pringle here, who took this picture, is one of those folks that has taken a lot of images of crop circles. This one showed up, I think, in the late 90s. It was around the time that Sim Harmain actually was working on decoding the geometry of space-time. This is the Kabbalistic tree of life. And if you take the bottom of the tree and you slide it up into the top, then you get a figure that if you rotate 360 degrees will give you the nodal points of the 64 tetrahedron grid and a star tetrahedron. And so this is a way of encoding the geometry of space-time that was hidden. And in the Kabbalistic tradition, they say, don't even try to decode this because you'll go insane. And Nassim, of course, says, well, most people think I'm insane already, so I have nothing to lose. And they went in there and decoded this symbol. And again, you can place 6 of these in a rotated hexagonal pattern, and you get the perfect geometry of the cuboctahedron and the scalar relationships of the geometry of spacetime. This is straight up a 64 tetrahedron grid with spheres around each one of the tetrahedrons. I actually have a small necklace that is a silver 64 tetrahedron grid. If you put spheres around each one of these tetrahedra, then you get a 3-dimensional flower of life symbol. The flower of life is not a 2-dimensional symbol. It's actually a 2-dimensional symbol that's trying to encode for you 3-dimensional information. And it's the way that those waveforms, the little Planck spherical units, the tiny little quantum bits that are billions of times smaller than a proton, when those waveforms pack together, they're perfectly space-filling, and they overlap each other and form these little Vesica Pisces petal shapes. And that structure of the overlapping waveforms at the Planck scale, 10 to the 60 of them inside of a proton, is basically a highly dense little flower of life lattice structure. So the flower of life is the geometry of the quantum waveforms that exist inside of every proton, inside of every atom, that make up your very existence and your body. And so the information that's that foundational being encoded into crop circles, it seems like a clue that it's coming from a civilization that has had access to this information for a long time, and it is trying to express it through these formations. And I've heard that these have formed sometimes in snow. I didn't include a picture of those. They don't have footprints coming up to them. There's obviously some people that have made them in snow. And then there's great patterns that have shown up in sand and in the desert, like in eastern Oregon, there was a giant Tibetan symbol, but that turned out to be made by a person. The ones that are the most controversial that don't seem like are made by people seem to always be in these several different species of crop in fields that are being mowed. Sometimes they're in fields that don't get mowed, but usually they're in fields that are mowed. So it makes people skeptical because they think that that's because you can then run along these tram lines that you see and not leave footprints. But there are indications of crop circles that aren't in this kind of situation and found all over the world and in different mediums. But it's true that it's largely in crops and it's largely in southern England. So it's rather confusing. You know, why would they just make them there? Why is it always in a crops, certain types of species? Why is it mostly in one season? These are all answers that we don't have. But we do see very interesting information being encoded into the geometries that are showing up. And this one is one of my favorites. It's actually the pi crop circle, which is encoding 3.1459, the value of pi, which is the relationship of the diameter to the circumference of a circle. How many times can you take the diameter of a circle and then wrap it around circumference? 3.14159. So this one, as you'll see here in this next slide, is encoding that. You've got a decimal point, and then you've got 3 units of slice of pi, if you will, in this crop circle, then the decimal, then 1, then 4, then 5, then 9, and it spirals around all the way until you get to those 3 black dots at the top. And that's kind of like on a sentence when you go dot, 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 like that just keeps going forever. We have not found an end to this number. It keeps going. The pattern doesn't repeat. It's a total mystery. There's a guy, Jane 108 Mathemagics, who has a really interesting theory that we have the value of pi incorrect. And he does a recalculation based on ancient Egyptian qubits. And man, that unlocks a whole nother level of stuff. Definitely recommend looking into, vortex math and the work of, especially this guy, Roman. Roman Light is him on Facebook, and Spiritual Mathematics is his Facebook page. Really great, interesting vortex-based math that relates very much to Jane 108 Mathemagics Facebook page information. You should check those guys out, because some of that stuff that we're talking about, vortex-based mathematics, is also encoded into the crop circles. And it's all about the 3, the 6, and the 9, like Tesla was saying. That's why he was saying that. We use base 10 to count things, right? You get to number 9, the next number is number 10. But really, the next number should be 1. It should go 1 through 9, 1 through 9. It should be base 9, not base 10. If you use base 9 for your math, then, oh man, everything starts to lock together and come together. You know, like our calendar, we have 12 months, but 13 moons. Man, maybe all of our systems of counting and our systems of time are all a little bit out of alignment. They're not totally tied in to natural cycles. And so no wonder we're so confused all the time and that we can't get it together. We need to go base 9, not base 10. And Marco Rodin is one of these guys that pioneered this work. And then this guy, Roman Light, looked at Rodin's math and he found an error. And when you correct that error, instead of the vortex, Rodin, if you've seen his vortex math, there's like a giant W kind of thing and these zigzags that go, and it's not symmetrical. It doesn't make sense. The universe is not making asymmetrical like that. If you do the math correctly and you place the 9 digits correctly in the right order around the outside, then you get the geometry of a star tetrahedron going infinitely smaller and infinitely larger, just like the scalar dimensions described by Nassim Haramein's unified field theory. And then if you use that system of base 9 and you calculate pi slightly differently, then everything starts to lock together. So pi is a whole mystery in itself. And here it is, again, encoded into a crop circle. Somebody did a neat little analysis of this, comparing it to an earlier crop circle that's a square and a circle. And that's another thing that's a pattern that you see repeated in crop circles, in mathematical problems, squaring the circle or cubing the sphere. The relationship of the volume of a circle to a volume of a square. And that's encoded everywhere. It's encoded into the relationship of the size of the earth and the size of the moon and the Great Pyramid of Giza. Man, it goes deep, super deep. Could spend an entire conference just talking about that stuff. But that kind of thing is also encoded into crop circles. It's like they're encoding tetrahedrons, energy, patterns of waveforms, pi and phi and Fibonacci. Here you've got this I. I don't know about this bottom one. That one looks All those little skeptic. I'm a little skeptical on that bottom one with the Eye of Horus there and the pyramid, like you see on the dollar bill. And man, of course, you can go way deep into all the conspiracy theory if you want to start talking about the Illuminati and the Federal Reserve and the World Bank, and you can watch like Zeitgeist and Zeitgeist Addendum and Thrive and all these movies. That kind of stuff is also being encoded into crop circles. Here's a tetrahedron with energy, looks like waves coming out of it, like a magnetic field, if you will. So they're showing various aspects of the physics of our reality. This one's showing you straight up the overlapping petals of the waveforms of spherical, spherical waveforms overlapping, gives you this Vesica Pisces eyeball kind of shape. There's a guy, Michael Evans, that I really like his theory, that the most simple platonic solid really is a three-sided solid. And so to have a three-sided solid, the lines would have to be curved. But there really aren't any straight lines, so to speak, in the universe, considering that everything is in space-time, and space-time is more like fluid dynamics, and it's always spinning, and it's always curling, and it's made of quantum bits that organize themselves. And if you get enough quantum bits to organize themselves and come together, you get something like a proton. And you get protons to come together in a certain way, you get a molecule, and you get enough molecules to come together, then you've got a compound, and then you get enough of that compound and you have something like water and humans and all these other things that are made up of all these quantum bits. But this is fundamental to that, is the overlapping waveform. Michael Evans calls that little Vesica Pisces thing the Trion ray, a three-sided platonic solid that starts at a point, the petals go out, and then those 3 points meet again. And that is the overlapping of spherical waveforms, a three-dimensional petal shape. Just by chance, randomly happening to be showing up in a crop circle. Not randomly. It's definitely specific information. Again, you don't see pictures of a landscape like a painting or something like this. It's very specific rotational geometries, fractal geometries, scalar geometries, things that have cycles. Here, this looks like kind of like a pinwheel. You have something like this one showing you eclipse cycles or cycles of the moon and the sun. There's some crop circles that showed up that showed the position of the solar system and where the planets would be on December 21st, 2012. So there's astronomical information being encoded, things about having to do with the quantum world and subatomic particles might be also encoded. So at all scales, we're seeing that information. That's a really gorgeous one. You can see somebody in the middle there, really small. This one's another great one to show you the scale and also the weaving patterns on the outside. There's all those people in there. It's hard to imagine that overnight they could mash down enough crops to make this perfect like this, and then weave all the crops together and all this stuff. So, no matter how these things are made in the end, I think they're amazing. And it doesn't really matter to me that much. If there was some crazy conspiracy of all these people that were able to do this and we still haven't been able to figure it out, that's pretty epic. But I have a feeling that these are being made in a way that no one yet understands. And it'll become clear once we understand the physics. The crop circles are mimicking things that we see in the universe and in the geometry of nature. Here we have these various plants and an aloe on the lower left and a nautilus shell and a snail shell, and ferns before they unfurl have that curl. And we see that here being mimicked in this kind of structure that you see in this crop circle. This one is fascinating too because it's mimicking the flower pattern that you would see, the 5 spirals that go out in things like sunflowers and aloe and in pine cones. It's encoded into the bark of trees, the way that the lines on the outside of trees striate. It's Fibonacci, it's phi, and that relationship and that type of curve and that type of curl is embedded into nature, of course, right? From the quantum world confirmed to the obvious stuff that you see like shells and flowers and cacti, all the way up to galaxies. You see the same striations, the same patterning. Don't drink too much tonight, guys. Don't drink tequila. We got a real lot of work to do tomorrow. Can you imagine, trying to make this perfect? This looks like a bar magnet, right? You have a bar magnet, you get a dual torus magnetic field coming off of it. The dual torus is absolutely fundamental as well to the structure of space-time. Oh, we got some loading going on. I guess I hit my last slide. Okay, good. The next section, getting stuff to be this detailed and this organized. This is the one I love to show when I'm joking about people, drinking and having a fun time running out in the fields. In the dark, without, perfect overhead view of this, it would be impossible to know that you're doing it correctly. Would take so much time and effort to make this perfect by hand. It just seems beyond reasonable to accept some of the traditional notions of these things. This one I love especially because this one looks pretty outside the box. It looks very different than those other ones. It doesn't have that same perfectly symmetrical aspect to it. This almost looks like graffiti to me, like, oh, that's a cool one. And so the funny story I like to tell about this one is, part of my personal take on this is, I think that these are being made by some other intelligence somewhere. And if there's a whole society within this other type of intelligence, I don't think the job of being somebody who has to go down to Earth and make crop circles is the greatest job that you could have in that society. They might just think, oh man, I have to go back down there again. Bummer, because when I go down there, they chase me with F-16 fighters. There's all these people with bad vibes that are angry and, fighting against each other and killing each other. I almost picture that they have to wear a suit just to protect themselves from our bad vibes because we can't even get along with each other. You think they're going to come down and start interacting with us and saying, oh yeah, we're the extraterrestrials. We've been here this whole time. Put us on TV. We want to talk to you. Man, there would be chaos. There would be very upset people. We are not quite ready. You guys on this teleconference, I have a feeling, are perfectly ready for those guys to come down and start talking to you. Some of you might be in contact with them right now. I've definitely heard lots of stories of people that have had their own experiences that are unexplainable, that maybe even got abducted or whatever you want to call it. And there's a ton of people on this planet that are absolutely not ready to even entertain the idea that could be happening. And if you tell them that you're in touch with extraterrestrials, they're going to say, come with me. I want to give you this special white suit that holds your arms like this, and I'll put you in a padded cell. We're still got a little ways to go, but if it's true that it's an extraterrestrial culture that's doing these things, they're probably waiting around a little bit longer until we get our act together. I have a feeling that we need to learn how to get along with ourselves first before we start interacting with the rest of the family out there in the galaxy. And so being a crop circle maker might just be like being a janitor or, some job that's low on the totem pole of fun in terms of all the jobs that you could do in the world, But even the graffiti artists of the galactic family, if you will, know that they got to keep their designs within the geometry of space-time. And so this one, although it looks totally outside the box and here's some people standing in it, it actually fits within the hexagonal fundamental geometry of space-time. So it's, even when it seems like it's totally outside the box and it's not fitting within, the unified geometry of the universe, if you will, or sacred geometry, it is. It's always hiding in there somewhere. But I love this one. I was just looking at it. You can imagine walking around this thing. It would be so awesome. This one's another really fascinating crop circle because this one showed up on 8808. It's the 8808 crop circle, August 8th, 2008. Some kids ran out there and added the little bits that you see down on the bottom that you can see how they're not symmetrical. But the spheres themselves in this figure 8 pattern perfectly scale up and down. And then there's a cycle of moons in the middle there, or a little solar system. Seems very interesting to me that this would show up on 8808. And here's another view of it. You can see the people in there and get a sense of scale. It's a pretty big one, actually. Fascinating. So here it is as kind of like a glyph, if you will. That's one of the cool things about these crop circles is once the crop circles are made, people find them pretty quickly. And then a bunch of people set out in airplanes and try to get the best pictures. And then they go on various websites. One of the encyclopedic websites for crop circles, as you may know, is Crop Circle Connector. They seem to post all crop circles, as far as I can tell, including ones that are obviously corporate logos and things like that. I wish they were a little more discerning, so that you're not just putting every single one up there, but that's what they do, I think. There's a bunch of different sites, obviously, that have crop circles on them. And I like when they simplify them and change them into these glyphs so that you can actually see the geometry really clearly. Let's see. After these slides, there's going to be a 5-minute pause to let you guys know. So we're going to do a little break in a second when we get through these next 29 or 21 slides. So here's where we start looking at the more recent ones where there's weaving patterns. You can see at the top here, this crop circle has a pentagram, 5-pointed star, and the bottom has these incredible swirls. A lot of times the farmers are not that psyched when a crop circle shows up on their farm, because they want to be farmers. They want, first of all, the crops have been damaged in this area. And it might not be a lot of area, but that's slightly less crop that they can actually harvest. And then, of course, the quote-unquote croppies come. And in some cases, thousands of people want to come walking onto your field, causing more damage and all this stuff. And so they might tell you, you know, I'm sorry, the crop circle's in there. If you want to fly over in an airplane or whatever, you can take a picture of it, but you're not allowed to walk into my field. And then some smart guy, like Mr. Gyro or others, take their little drones, right? And they fly a drone over the crop circle. And so these are images that I believe were taken from drone footage. And so another new cool place to find crop circles is not just doing an image search on Google or another search engine. It's not just going to websites. You can actually go on YouTube and search for videos of flights over crop circles. And man, some of those are really nice because you get to see it from various angles. They fly, you know, far and close up and swoop around and put it to music and edit it all together into a nice little format. So it's quite interesting to check those out. This one is another one from drone footage. You can see here in the lower right, there's a classic a feature that you see in crop circles where there's a spiral, and in the middle it kind of sticks out and it's all swirled around the stalks right there. And this one is straight up basket weaving style, like when you were in summer camp and learned to weave baskets. It looks like that. And then there are these arcs. And then again, something like Crop Circle Connector will take these, make them into glyphs, and then analyze the geometry. And a bunch of different people comment as to their theories and their decoding of it. Here's a closer look of that weaving pattern. And here's Mr. Gyro. He's another one of these guys that does the drone footage. And this one's interesting, these curling almost bits. It's like a dot matrix printer style. And you can see that there are these tufts. You know, it'd be really hard to know when you're on the ground looking at these clumps that you're going to make it come out so perfectly looking like this when you fly overhead. Just imagine walking through and seeing how perfect this all is laid down like this. I can't wait to get myself into a crop circle someday. And there's a bunch of people that have gone out and done research on these, including folks that are doing, you know, peer-reviewed journal science. It's not commonly known that peer-reviewed journal studies have been done on crop circles that basically, in my mind, prove beyond a reasonable doubt that at least some crop circles, it's very highly unlikely that it was made by a human being. For example, you can look in there and notice that the stalks are not just mushed down. It's not a mechanical process that pushed these crops down. The crops are woven together, and in some cases, there's nodal points on the stalks. It's not just that they're bent, that you can see here, there are these little bumps, like a little elbow forms on the stalk, and then it bends off at an angle. It's not just an existing stalk that's been broken and snapped and laid down flat. It's as if half of it would be, you know, growing faster or something on the side. And they've done, you know, detailed studies of these stalks and the nodal points, and have categorized them and, you know, brought them to laboratories and looked at them under the microscope. And they've taken seeds from inside the crop circle and seeds outside the crop circle, and then grown them in a lab under identical conditions. And the ones that were inside the crop circle grow oftentimes stronger and faster and more healthy and higher height in the same amount of time as the ones that were taken from right outside the crop circle. So it seems like the biology has been affected by something, whether it be a field, a type of energy, a type of frequency of radiation. It's unclear, but the biology is reacting to something, or the biology is doing it itself, or it's being told somehow biochemically to change. It's very mysterious, obviously. But people have been going to the point of looking, in detail at the structure of these nodes and comparing samples on the inside and the outside of crop circles on a microscopic level, not just looking at it from airplanes and things like this. So the science is starting to happen and it's being published, and so really the onus is on the skeptic to debunk the science, not the other way around. There's science already showing that this can't just be a board and a rope. And so how are you going to explain this with a board and a rope? You've got normal stalks, bent stalks, and then these blown out nodes where it's split open. You can't just go and individually, affect the stalks one at a time to make them all do this. It just wouldn't be possible. There wouldn't be enough time. Sometimes three-dimensional geometries are being conveyed very convincingly in the medium of this quote-unquote flat 2D surface, which is really a bunch of little things sticking up. It's 3D. But this one is August 26, 2012, and it's a cube and inside of a circle. And so this might be alluding to the old squaring the circle or sphering the cube problem. You can see the weaving in the lower right there. There's a weaving pattern happening. And then crop circles like this where there's multiple cubes and you've got the radiation of these tetrahedrons coming out. Check out those people standing in there. It would be hard to know that you're making a cube, something that looks like a cube even, just standing next to one of these things. It's pretty big. You really do need to get up into the sky to look back down on it to see the big picture. So there's a lot of variety in the crop circles, and they've been getting more prevalent, I think, and more complex as time goes along. Some of them are very different from others. Some of them are more similar and can be categorized in a similar way. There's a bunch that have spin involved, that's for sure, that involve literally circles. There's not always a circle in a crop circle, but a lot of times it starts with circles. I think some of the earliest crop circles were literally just one circle. Then there were two circles. Then there was a circle and another circle with a line connecting it. And then there was more circles. And then it was a whole bunch of circles. Now we're getting stuff like this where it's massive. There's a whole bunch of circles. They're all in order. You can see that there's fractally trailing off little bits. It's really a quantum description of the Planck spherical units that make up protons. It's the description of how galaxies are spinning and that there's a central black hole and stars are rotating in a very organized manner across 150,000 light years. Did you know that the galaxy is 150,000 light years across? It's not 100,000. They just upgraded it by 50%. Just shows you how quickly everything's changing. Everybody in the history of astrophysics answered on their test. How many light years across is the Milky Way? 100,000. Everyone was wrong. It's 150,000. They just found additional waves that they couldn't see before because there was all this dust. And now they've gotten technology to see through the accretion disk, which is very difficult. When you look at the sky at night in the Milky Way, right, there's all those stars. It's denser. That's because you're looking along the equator of our galactic structure, which on the halos, there's less stars. There's much more along this one plane, the equator of our galaxy called the accretion disk. It's hard to see through that disk because there's so much dust and asteroids and other stars. But now we've got technology that's been able to see through various frequencies and seen that the galaxy is actually more like a record. There's ripples. It's got grooves in it. Just like our solar system, the planets are sitting in nodal points that are harmonics of the foundational resonating central black hole. There's a supermassive black hole, smaller black holes called stars come shearing off of there. So yeah, Nassim Haramein thinks stars are black holes. He also defines protons as black holes. And the physics on that is an entire lecture. I don't have time to go into it. But this crop circle and all these other ones showing spin are showing something that's absolutely fundamental to the universe's organizational structure. It's fractal spin inside of spin. It's, protons that are spinning, and your energy field is spinning, and you're on a planet that's spinning around a star that's spinning around a galaxy that's spinning in a cluster of galaxies that's spinning, and the whole universe is probably a giant torus curling in on itself. And there's another bigger torus outside of it, and it's infinite fractal torus spin from infinitely big to infinitely small. And so here's, a nice example of showing how that might, manifest in 3D in a crop. This one actually showed up on the news. This one made it to CNN, you guys, because it showed up after a torrential rainstorm. The crop was absolutely mud, not a single trace of any footprints anywhere. There were helicopters flying over this thing, broadcasting this. This one is one of the few crop circles that caught some attention. It was the biggest one ever at the time. I'm not sure if there's a bigger one now. I can't remember exactly how many circles, but it's one of the biggest that is ever shown. Spin is absolutely essential. Everything is spinning, galaxies, us, and Nassim wanted to encode that, and he created a small animation that unfortunately won't play, but it shows that the sun, if it's moving really quickly through the galaxy, means all the planets are actually making a helix vortex as it travel through space. The sun is not sitting still. We don't go in a circle around the sun. We could stop telling kids that right now. I have a feeling we're still telling kids the sun is right here and the earth is right here, and it goes in a big circle, and when it gets back to where it started, that's a year. It takes a year for the earth to go around the sun, one rotation. And if you could only just tell the kids, oh yeah, the sun is moving, so actually you're making a giant helix, and one rotation around the helix is what a year is, then you're properly visualizing the dynamics of our local environment. And boy, would that be helpful. I think we should be teaching that more often. Yet schools often have a sun model of the solar system with a little bar for each planet. And so you're literally imagining the planets going in circles. And it's time to unflatten our description of reality to the kids, not just in the solar system, but in everything. The kids are ready to hear the real deal. I want to make a DVD called Unified Field Theory for Kids, where I explain all the stuff that I've been explaining with puppets and say, here's the deal, kids. There's this, structure to the universe, and you talk about balls bouncing and playing and having fun, and they'll get it. I know they'll get it because I've been telling them this, and they all look at me like, oh yeah, I was just talking about that with my friend, because they're all off in space anyway. They're talking about flying across the galaxy all the time. I think we're going to head that direction. There's a great video on YouTube that took Nassim Haramein's original animation and then made it a little bit more advanced and developed. And it's, of course, really hard, if not impossible, to make a visualization of this, because to make it to scale would be really hard. Pluto is so far away compared to the distance between, say, Mercury and Earth, that your animation would mean that everything's tiny and you can't see it. And so he scaled it down and tried to make the relationships a little bit better, and made the plane of the ecliptic be at 60 degrees like it's supposed to be in relation to the motion of the sun, and all these things to try to keep it a little bit more realistic. And then, of course, the trolls come out and say, this is wrong, this is wrong, this is wrong. And then you're like, okay, great, you go make an animation about this. I mean, the fact that we made Avatar, but we can't make a basic graphic to show kids like, oh yeah, here's the most foundational geometry of your local environment. You'd think you could make a video that's perfectly to scale to show this, but we don't really have it. Nassim had to have somebody make one 10 years ago. But of course, this is mimicking what we see the universe doing on all scales. There's a carbon particle at the bottom that's microns across. Then you've got a hurricane that's hundreds of kilometers across. And then you've got a galaxy that's tens of thousands of light years across, all with the same phi Fibonacci ratio of the vortex going towards stillness at the center, singularity, the eye of the hurricane, if you will. The largest hurricane ever recorded had the coldest, stillest eye of the hurricane ever recorded. So if you want to learn how to spin out and have a lot of energy, it helps to learn how to center yourself, literally, by pointing your attention to the center of your existence. this same kind of stuff is being expressed in crop circles. We see it in nature, and then we see it in crop circles. We see it going back and forth. He's telling me to keep going. He's going to upload the next section. Somebody's saying do a TED talk on crop circles. Thank you. I take that as a compliment because, you know, although I'm able to talk about crop circles for a while and I know some stuff about them, I'm by no means an expert on the crop circles. There's so much more to know about these than I've had time to go into, because I'm going into unified field theory. I'm trying to understand the entire universe. And so I'm really spreading my study time and my knowledge base out along all disciplines, right? I'm interested in psychology and sociology and anthropology and archaeology. And I recently did a whole stream with Portal to Ascension on the ancient cultures and ancient origins, and, you know, the work of Graham Hancock and others that have been studying ancient cultures, rewriting the human history. You can check that out on Portal to Ascension. That's available right now. I recorded it in October. And there's also talks on unified field theory that are 5 hours long, 5.5 hours long, where I do my full download. Also Portal to Ascension. So you should check those out. A lot of great stuff. Actually, the Ancient Cultures one I did with the Resonance Project. That's part of the Resonance Academy. And that's for free. You can look that up on YouTube. Jamie Janover, Resonance Project, Ancient Cultures. But the Portal to Ascension one is 5.5 hours of me doing this stuff. And it's not just the crop circles. It's all the unified field theory stuff, all the ancient culture stuff. There's a lot to be learned, and there's a lot more coming up in the future on all this stuff. Now that we have the technology, we have the ability to share the information. We have the ability to go into all different kinds of exchanges of information and doing things like this program right now. I want to just take a minute while we're in the transition to say thank you to the people who are on here, and that I would consider anybody who signed up for this and knew about it and said, I'm going to spend my Sunday checking this out. I consider you personally to be a very important seed human being, I should say, on the surface planet at this time in our history, because we need to share all the information we can about our reality and cross-pollinate ideas and culture as much as possible, and be absolutely unified in our vision of where we want to go. Just like birds, starlings that can murmurate and fly all together in this big flock, and no one's leading, they just all are at the same time. If we could all point our attention to where we want to go at the same time, we could achieve anything. We could have peace on earth. We could have free energy. We could have, as much fun as humanly possible all the time. And that's what I'd like to see happening, that we can transform our planet through the understanding of the universe. In other words, if it turns out that this information that is being expressed crop circles and through unified field theory and is encoded by all these ancient cultures is all the same thing, it would point us towards the idea that really all humans are the same, that we're all part of this much bigger structure than just the Earth, that we're embedded in the geometry of space-time. And therefore, we should just get over ourselves and stop doing stupid things like killing people for their beliefs. Let people believe what they want. It's okay. We can all believe something different, and that's actually what makes it interesting. If we all believe the same thing, if we all had the same style of music, if we all did the same stuff all the time, it would be so boring. I love traveling. I love going to some culture where I'm like, what they eat, what they do, what they look like, what, wow, that is so interesting. I want to go to this country, and I want to go to this country. I want to know what is up with Buddhism. I want to know what's up with Islam. I want to know what's up with Christianity and Judaism. I want to know Native American traditions. I want to know what the shamans say. I want to know what the crop circles say. I want to know what physicists say. I want to know about channeling. I want to know about telepathy. I want to know about everything there is to know about. And man, if you could see all that and then see how it's all connected, then hopefully through that, if everybody had that, then there'd be more tolerance, there'd be more acceptance, there'd be more empathy, there'd be more helping people, and everything get much more fun in a short amount of time. I would like to say more fun, less not fun, right? Not fun is my book says this and your book says that, so I'm going to kill you. And people are doing that right now. And we don't need to do that, because if you look at the geometry of these books, the information that's encoded in the Quran, the Torah, the Bible, the Mayan calendar, the I Ching, all that stuff, it's all the same geometry. It's the geometry of the structure of space-time. It's the geometry that's showing on these crop circles. So that's why maybe it's important to actually check out the crop circles. It's not just because of cool shapes. The cool shapes are the structure of our reality. The spin of the universe at all scales is absolutely fundamental. Here's a really cool spiral. It's not a crop circle. It showed up in the sea off of Ibiza, which is off the coast of Spain. And I've heard that this is actually an algae bloom causing the coloration, but there's obviously a vortex in the water there for some reason. It might just be currents that spin like that. But I included this because it's kind of like a water aquatic natural crop circle, if you will. Here's another view of this. This was just last month, or maybe it was 2 months ago. Somebody actually sent this to me directly on Facebook. I forget his name, but if you go back on my Facebook page through the photo tab down there, you'll see it after you scroll for a little bit. Now I just wanted to show this slide because I mentioned the platonic solids. I talked about a tetrahedron. I just wanted to let you know that if you take a circle and then you place circles tangentially off that circle in a hexagonal pattern, 2 out of each branch in hexagonal patterning, you have a total of 13 circles. And if you connect the center of all those 13 circles together, you get a figure known as Metatron's cube, which is the overall white lines underneath these colored shapes. And then through those centers of those circles, you get these various geometries coming out called the platonic solids. Each solid has identical faces with identical angles and vertices on each face. And there's only 5. There's tetrahedron, octahedron, cube, and dodecahedron, and icosahedron. This was created by my friend Marco, who's in Barcelona, Spain. So it's actually in Spanish, which is why it's cubo and not cube. But in any case, these are the fundamental geometries of the universe, and they're very commonly showing up in crop circles. I wanted to show this one because it shows you the overlapping of circles forming these Pisces shapes. Eventually you get to the 6 days of creation, and then the 7th is formed in the middle, and that's the seed of life and building towards the flower of life symbol that many of you have seen a million times. And biology organizes itself in this same fundamental pattern. So we are the geometry of space-time. This is the first image ever taken of a molecule showing individual atomic bonds. This is a photo by IBM, and you can see the hexagonal honeycomb style like you see in beehives there, and these are atomic bonds. And so the bees are smart. They are organizing their home into the structure of atoms, of carbon atoms. So the geometry goes all the way down. And again, we're seeing this showing up in the form of crop circles. There's the ancient Egyptian symbol known as the flower of life. Apologies for this slide cutting off. I don't know why it's doing that. And then you see Nassim Haramein's theorized geometry for the structure of space-time based on the idea that space we know to be completely filled with vacuum fluctuations to the tune of 10 to the 96 grams per cubic centimeter. But we perceive it as empty because the structure of the space is absolutely perfect in a perfectly balanced vector equilibrium. The flower of life being a encoded version of Metatron's cube. You can see that it's cut off. There's this corpus callosum, if you will, double line around the outside of the flower of life, cutting off the last circle. So it's 1, 2, and then the third circle is cut off. It's encoded information. This has been passed down. Information has been hidden and encoded into geometric structures around the world, including the pyramids all over the world, and somewhat hidden. And now it's all starting to come out through the work of many people, including Nassim Haramein, who's now showing that this very same structure is likely the overlapping fundamental spherical waveforms of the Planck oscillator pixels that make up everything because they make up protons. It's a Planck, sea of Plancks, if you will, like a bunch of water is made of molecules. Space-time is quantized. It's made of these little bits, Planck bits that are 1.616 times 10 to the negative 33 meters, which means it's a decimal point with 33 zeros after it, and then 1616 centimeters. That's how small a Planck length is. It's billions of times smaller than a proton. And these are tiny little quantum bits that make up everything. And when you see how they fit together and how that geometry is expressed, and then you see it being reflected back to us by crop circles, it points to me to the idea that somebody who understands this was able to translate this to us and is trying to communicate it. I think that we are being helped. I think we're being watched. I think we're being aided. I am not worried. I don't think that we're going to be abducted by extraterrestrials that have third eye laser beams coming out, and reptilian aliens that have infiltrated the government and are going to abduct you and take you to a foreign planet to mine gold for them and all this stuff that David Icke talks about. I mean, maybe billions of years ago there was some crazy stuff going on like that, but we certainly don't see any evidence of people fighting each other and killing each other over stuff. If you can fly across the galaxy faster than the speed of light, you certainly don't need to abduct a human to do stuff for you. You can make gold from scratch like this because you understand how to organize Planck bits to make gold molecules and atoms. So I don't believe in spreading fear-based knowledge. I feel like you just present the knowledge as it is and leave out the fear part. Leave out the you should be worried about the Illuminati making a pact with the evil gray aliens and planet Nibiru is going to come jumping out from behind the sun and they're all of a sudden going to be like, ta-da, we're going to kidnap you all. And man, that is science fiction. You can't use some sort of crazy technology that enables you to fly across the galaxy and then also use that to kill people. It just wouldn't work. It's built into the universe that you can't do that. You'd be blowing up planets and stars all over the place. We see no evidence of anybody destroying the universe. Somebody's saying supernovas. Supernovas, yeah, that's a natural life cycle of a star. Everything in the universe has a life cycle. Stars have a life cycle, and we have a life cycle. Maybe when you die, you're not actually dying or going anywhere. You're just changing states. When a star dies, it's a terrible name for it. It's really just the plasma around the black hole in the center of the star shooting off, and now you can see the black hole. Astronomers will say, oh yeah, a star blows up and then a black hole forms. And Nassim says, didn't you ever think that the black hole was always there and it just shed its plasma? Maybe when you die, you're shedding your plasma, which is your body, and then the existence of your energy form, your soul or your spirit or whatever you want to call it, continues on. And then it maybe manifests physically into another thing, or maybe it doesn't. That's the biggest question there is, right? Somebody's like, what happens after you die? That's a good question. If anybody can answer that, that would be the biggest answer of all time. But I have a feeling that if you can study the universe in a very detailed way and observe nature at all scales, from the quantum to the cosmological, you can start to derive an understanding of how all this stuff works and how life and death work, including the life cycles of stars and the life cycle of everything, and the vortices that form on all scales. If you have a small little hurricane, it's called an atom. If you have a larger hurricane, it's a hurricane. If you have a really big hurricane in structure of space-time, it's called a galaxy. They're all doing the same thing. Supermassive black holes center galaxies, singularities at various sizes, at the center of black holes, center all black holes. And we see these vortices being encoded into crop circles all the time. This one is one of the most fascinating crop circles of all time. This one is the Arecibo response crop circle that's coming from this message. This message was sent up by Carl Sagan in the 70s. It was part publicity stunt probably and part real science. Basically, scientists said, well, if there are extraterrestrials, let's try to talk to them. What should we try to say? So they sent these ones and zeros, binary code, up into space using the Arecibo telescope in Puerto Rico. And it took quite a while for the message to come back. But basically we were saying we're made of, these elements, and we're mostly carbon and water, and we have a two-stranded DNA molecule, and we have certain relationship of our, body size, our arms and our legs and our head. And we have 8 planets and 1 star, and we live on the 3rd planet. So you can see down here in the orange section there, the 3rd planet right underneath the guy's legs there is raised up. And that's to say that's us on Earth on this size planet. And then we have these other ones. And at the bottom of the image, it says, here's the technology we used to send you this message, the Arecibo telescope. And we got a response not as a radio telescope message, because if they sent it as a radio telescope message, all of the governments of the world, especially the United States, who has an embargo on anything having to do with extraterrestrials, would grab it and say, thank you very much, we got your message. We're certainly not going to tell anybody about it. And then whoever sent this message said, the way to get this out is to put it down as a crop circle, because then somebody's going to fly over it and take a picture. And they didn't just put it down in any old field. They put it down in the field next to the telescope that's listening to space 24/7, 365 for a message from space. And so the guy is guarding this installation in the morning, looks out over the field, is like, wait a minute, what is that? There's a crop circle next to this telescope, and look at that. It's a perfect response in the same format as the crop circle or as the message that we originally sent. And then there's a mugshot, as Nassim likes to say, a mugshot of the guy who sent it. Not that it's a mugshot, but it looks like a portrait of somebody's face. And this is, fascinating that the message comes down right next to this telescope. And here you are standing in the crops in the middle of the night. It's dark. So imagine you're in the dark looking at these. How would you make a face? The only way you could make a face is if you got up into the sky and could look back down on it. If you squint your eyes while you look at that face, you can kind of see the imagery pop out a little bit better. Large eye sockets, looks like, a traditional extraterrestrial with the enlarged eyes. And on the left is the response in the crops. And it's the same format that we sent it. Basically, the translation is that we, yes, also have carbon and water molecules. We have a 3-stranded DNA molecule. We have a much larger head compared to our bodies than you guys. We also have 8 planets, but we live on 3 of them. One of them has 4 moons. And down at the bottom, you see where we had the Arecibo telescope, the technology they used to send us the message. And that is really hard to understand. What is all that? It looks like a bunch of dots or something. But look at this face. If you wanted to make that face in the dark, this is what you're looking at when you're standing in the crops. I don't think you're just going to be able to make that. You'd have to have friends in a silent, lightless helicopter with 3D, or night vision goggles and 2-way radios, and they're like calling down to you. Yeah, you're working on the nose. Yeah, that nostril's too big. You're gonna have to, no, not that one, to your left. Prop up some of those crops. Make that tuft a little bit bigger. I don't think so. You never see crop circles where they're like, oops, we shouldn't have laid down those. Prop that back up again. Oh, whoops. Now you can tell that they were broken and then they're propped up again. It's not really how that works. I don't understand why this one has not been publicized more, but man, first of all, you'd have to get the message and figure out how you would code, binary code the molecules and the DNA and all these parts. And then just to do that on paper would be hard. Then to make it into a crop circle that's perfectly worded and then make a face that looks like a face from an airplane. I don't think so. Here's a more detailed analysis of the crop circle and where the information is encoded. If you want to look this up online, you can look at the Arecibo response because it was using the Arecibo telescope. It's one of the most fascinating crop circles ever. And then maybe the number one, maybe it's a tie, is the ones coming up after this. But here's a blow up of the technology they used to send you this message. At the bottom of that crop circle, they gave you this, and here this crop circle actually showed up right next to that same telescope exactly 1 year to the day earlier than the telescope. So it's a clue or a message as to how they got this down there. And one time I thought, maybe if I get a tattoo, I would put this on myself. I don't have any tattoos, but I did encounter a woman who has this tattooed across her back, all the way across her back. It's fascinating to think that this is a technology, that could be a singularity with boundary condition, like an event horizon. And then there's another singularity, half inside and half outside that event horizon. And it's fractally dividing off to infinity from there. Fascinating crop circle. And then this one is another absolutely classic. The joke about this one is that whoever was putting down the crop circles was getting frustrated. Like, okay, they're not getting it. We got to be more literal. Well, they've invented portraits. They've got photography now. So we'll put a guy in a frame holding out a disc because they've invented CDs, and we'll encode ASCII code on there, which is scientific codec for an international way of encoding binary information in science. And so you can decode that disc into English. And this was really fascinating when I first saw this. This is another thing that you'll find in Daniel Pinchbeck's book, Return of Quetzalcoatl. If you look at the number of lines in the portrait and the number of rows or lines in the disc, there's a phi relationship, I believe, between the two. Sorry, I'm getting a little, my voice is straining a little. This one has a whole bunch of sacred geometry and numerology that's encoded in it. It's deeper than I have time to go into, but I can tell you that the translation of this disc, if you encode it into ASCII code, it says, "Beware the bearers of false gifts, their broken promises, much pain but still time. Believe there is good out there. We oppose deception," and then bell sound, otherwise known as conduit closing, is what they say. There's capital letters because in ASCII code, there's different symbols for upper and lower case letters. And the word oppose only has 2 capital letters because some kids ran through this crop circle before they could fully decode it and messed up some of the little tufts. And so they weren't sure if it's capital or not, or that either that or they just had a hard time deciphering that word. In any case, this is very much up for interpretation, right? Because this is just English words. And so what are they talking about? Somebody like Daniel Pinchbeck will say, I think that this is one species of extraterrestrial warning you against other species of extraterrestrials, that some might be good and some might be bad, or some have good intentions and some have bad intentions, and they're actually fighting it out up there to try to decide what to do with us or something like this. Nassim Haramein is very clear about this. He really doesn't think that there's any such thing as a quote-unquote bad ET. He thinks that any civilization that has evolved their technology to the point where they can get into a ship and fly across the galaxy is a technology that is not bad, that is not going to use that technology for evil purposes. They would have destroyed themselves. They would have not made it through. I mean, we barely have made it through nuclear weapons. And the Cold War very easily could have been a Cold War, not because we were so good and so restrained that no human ever said, let's see if this works, and press the red button and sent a nuclear warhead up into space. So far, that has not happened. And it's not probably because of the good of man. It's because they've been watching us and said, now, little children, you guys can figure it out on your own, but we're not going to let you mess up this entire 4 billion-year-old experiment, or if you will, or whatever, by pressing one button. So we're just going to go down there and go psst, 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 and put out the warheads. Check out the Disclosure Project, right? I'm sure somebody has mentioned this already, right? That there are Air Force generals that have 4 stars and put their hand on a Bible in front of Congress and said, I have everything to lose and nothing to gain by telling you some cockamamie crazy story about extraterrestrials guarding the warheads. But here I am swearing under God on the Bible that I was guarding the missile silos, and my guy on the surface called down and was freaking out. And I said, what's going on? And there's a ship beaming down doing something. They neutralized the warheads. Check out this, this testimony exists. And of course, if you're a military person, you're like, we're under attack. They've disabled our defenses. And it's more like, now, kids, enough playing with matches. We're just going to disable your little toys that could destroy the planet with a press of a button. And then you can go about and figure out the rest. In other words, remember, in Star Trek, there's the prime directive. You don't go down and mess up the early civilization and tell them, oh yeah, we came from a ship over there. They're going to look at you and be like, what? You have a ship? You can fly through space? It's going to totally mess up their whole worldview. So maybe that's what's going on here. I don't know. It seems like that if I was watching a civilization, I was flying out into space, I'd want to let them just kind of percolate to the point where they figure it out amongst themselves so that you can go land and say, hey, what's up? And they're not going to just shoot you, right? The first thing that happens if a UFO goes into American airspace is F-16 fighters go and chase it away, and it goes boop and it's gone. And then there's other countries like Mexico that tell their Air Force, oh yeah, don't fly over there because that's where the ships go. Let them have their airspace. It's coming out. It's all coming out. I suppose this whole thing that we're doing right now is proof of that, right? A disclosure conference. So here's the detailed look of that crop circle disk, and the difficulty that it must be to try to decode all these little dots, and how you can figure it out. And there's confusion about how many spaces there are, and is that supposed to be a space or a dot? And what about this section? It's all messed up, and we can't tell what it says here. And pretty fascinating. And then you've got crop circles that are encoding cymatic kind of waveform interactions, like oil droplets and surface waves. Waveforms can form in a medium and they interact. They don't stop each other, and they constantly are fluctuating. And really, that's basically what our existence is. We're in a sea of frequencies all overlapping. And where they come together, they form specific geometries that give us the structures that we see in the natural world in the forms of atomic structure, galactic structure, or whatever scale you're talking about. And to see all this information and all these geometries being encoded into these crop circles is fascinating, a mystery, super interesting. There could be a lot of new information that we could glean from this, but we really have to have an open mind. If you're just a skeptic and you think it's just drunk kids making these, you're not going to get anything out of it. If you're highly attuned and you look very closely and you study them and you meditate on it, you might get all kinds of insights that you're maybe not even aware of. You might be cleansing yourself right now just by looking at these images. I think that geometry in general and having these hit your retina, this information is, being remembered. There might be waking up a cellular memory of something that happened a long time ago. And I now move to this important slide. Notice all these symbols. These are all religious symbols. This is actually an evolutionary tree of religion. And notice the yellow branch right there where there's the Judaic star, and then Islam and Christianity are branching right off of that. That's just one little branch of the tree of religion. And those three religions right now are not getting along particularly well. There's people in those three religions, all three of them, that are angry and upset and are saying, I say it's like this and you say it's like that, and that really makes me upset, and I'm going to get violent. I'm going to become a terrorist or something. It's like that can stop right now, because check it out. All the religions are describing the same thing in a different way. What if we celebrated the religions like we celebrate styles of music? What if it was like, oh, you guys dance like that, we dance like this. Cool, let's have a festival where we all get together and we'll have a stage for this and a stage for that. So I would love to see, personally, what I like to call Festival Earth, where we have a stage for this religion and a stage for this religion. And I'm going to go over to the Islamic stage because, man, it's all perfectly, amazingly tiled with sacred geometry everywhere. And everybody bows in the same direction to a giant cube 5 times a day. Talk about being entrained and having your stuff coordinated. That's epic. Oh, and then we're going to go to the Native American stage where they put feather headdresses on, dance in a circle, and it starts raining. Amazing. Let's go to the Hindu stage. They've got sitars and incense and really cool music. We'll go check that out. Then we'll go to the Jewish stage and we'll do that circular vortex dance on the chair and call it good. Yay. You guys pray like that. You guys pray like that. Festival Earth. Great. Because guess what? We're all encoding the same stuff, trying to answer the same questions in a different way, just like we're playing different styles of music and we're drawing different styles of paintings or whatever. We can pray and have faith in different ways. Wouldn't that be great? And guess what? The geometry that's encoded in crop circles, weirdly enough, could help for the fundamentalists of any religion to see that, oh, the way I think about stuff is just like a different picture of the same thing, which is, how did we get here and how did all this stuff happen? And is there other life in the universe? Yeah, probably. And if so, who are those folks and what are they saying? I have a feeling they're not killing each other if they were able to develop technology that flew across the planet. So one truth, many songs, let's all get along right now on planet Earth. That's why it's important to talk about the stuff that we're talking about in this conference, the bigger picture. We're just trying to figure it out on this one little sphere, in this one little corner of this one little galaxy. There's so much more else going on out there. Every day they're announcing, oh, we found another Earth-like planet. Oh, we found another Earth-like planet. The chance that we're the only life in the universe is just about zero, I would say. And so we should be prepared for the next step, which is not just thinking globally, not just thinking galactically, thinking multiversally to the big, 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 big picture, outside of our universe even, and realizing that we have to integrate all of this. We have to expand our consciousness all the way to that scale and really allow everybody to do their thing, like these DJs playing music in different styles, like the different religions. I would love to see that happen. And so that's part of why I do these talks. It's not just because I think crop circles are cool, or I think physics is cool. It's because in the end, understanding the geometry and the physics actually will help people to get along better and have more fun and like do stuff together and make it really great. And I, again, would just like to see more fun and less not fun. And man, the crop circles are fun. I will for sure at some point get into a crop circle. I'll be going to Europe later this year. I'm going to do a cruise with Nassim Haramein in Croatia. October 9 to 16 or something. And then on the 17th and 18th, we're going to the Bosnian pyramids. So if you're interested in going on that, it's going to be epic. It's an entire week of download from Nassim and I on everything, basically from crop circles to cosmology and quantum mechanics and psychology, anthropology, ancient cultures, chemistry and the kind of like interaction of the microtubules in your brain with the quantum vacuum. In other words, Nassim's new paper, which is coming out later this year, is about the mechanics of consciousness and how we interact with the vacuum, how we inform the vacuum and how the vacuum informs us. It's pretty epic. And again, check out Portal to Ascension's offerings. There's a ton of different programs out there, including my 5.5-hour unified field theory, which is basically a Reader's Digest version of what we're going to do on that cruise. There's also the Resonance Academy, which is an online school that's being developed by the Resonance Project, which is about to become the Resonance Academy. And it's a great online course that you can do at your own pace, self-study. There's people from all over the world, and it's more detailed than I could possibly present, even in a full weekend of speaking for 20 hours. There's so much information in the Resonance Academy. So check that out. Here's the flyer for the cruise. And if anybody has questions, I can take a couple questions if you want. We're at about 3:40, went about 10 minutes over my originally slotted time, but happy to take that. Here's the flyer for the unified field theory thing that we did in October. This is on Portal to Ascension, and people seem to like it. And thank you guys all very much for being here and supporting this kind of thing. Definitely spread the word. And I encourage everybody to be active on social media in general and spread anything good, especially because I think we need to counterbalance all the bad news that's constantly being projected out by all the news agencies out there. It'd be great to have a good news station. I know there's a couple of ones like that, but I think we all need to be good news stations in social media land. So yeah, look me up on all the usual channels out there in social media land. I do a lot of photography and Instagram, and I'm on Facebook and Twitter and all that stuff. So check out the Resonance Project Foundation, Nassim Haramein. Thought process, I think, is key, is to remain open and really question everything and look at everything from every possible angle.